Good morning, W3CU. Welcome to church. Man, it is so glad to know that you're out there and you're watching and you're part of what we're doing here. You're part of our church. We're glad that you're with us. I want to just share with you a couple of things that you might want to know about. Number one is we are in a season of prayer right now. We call it 21 Days of Prayer. If you'd like to come and be with us in person, we'd be thrilled to have you. Now, I know you probably think we're crazy because we meet at 6 in the morning, Sunday through Friday. We're here at 6 a.m. We're gathering in the gym for 21 days of prayer. And then on Saturdays, though, we meet at 8:30. So it's a little bit later. You can sleep in some. But this is a great time to gather together and to seek the face of God and to seek direction from the Lord. And I want to encourage you to be with us, whether you can be with us in person or you join us from your home. It's a great time of prayer. And then next week, I want to let you know my good friend Greg and his wife Teresa Leith are going to be with us. And he's going to be sharing next week about living a life of purpose. And that's one of our values here. And I'm excited that they're going to be with us. So make sure next week just to tune in and hear what Greg has to say. I want to just real fast mention that we've started a new series, and it's called 7 Values That Will Change Your Life. And we're revisiting our values, and I think this is such an important discussion for us to have. I want to start off and tell you a little bit about a college professor. He was teaching a time management class to freshmen at his college. And so he gathers in with all these students. He comes in the room. He doesn't say a word. He grabs a wide-mouthed 1-gallon jar and he sets it on the table. Well, he reaches underneath the table and takes out 7 tennis ball-sized rocks and he places them in the jar, all the way up to the top. And then he looks at the students and he says, "Is the jar full?" And the students all say, "Yes, it's full." And he says, "Well, not really." And then he reaches underneath the table and he pulls out a bucket of pea gravel. And he begins to pour those in the jar until he fills it all the way up to the brim. And he says, "Is it full now?" Well, these kids were smart, and they said, "No, it's not full yet." And he said, "Good answer." And he reaches underneath the table, and again, he pulls out a bucket, this time of sand. And he pours sand down, and it goes between the pebbles and between the rocks and down into the jar, and he fills it all the way to the brim. And he looks at the students, and he says, "Is the jar full?" And the students say, "No, not yet." And he says, "Good answer." And then he reaches underneath, and he pulls out a pitcher of water, and he begins to pour water into the jar and fills it all the way to the brim with the water. And then he asked a question. And he says, "Do you know what I was trying to teach you with this illustration?" Well, one enthusiastic student raises his hand. And he says, "Go ahead, young man." And he says, "You're teaching us that, no matter how full our schedule is, we can always squeeze in something else." And he said, "Nope, that's not the lesson. The lesson is this. Unless you put the big rocks in first, they'll never get into the jar." And that is true about life, and it's true about our values. See, those things, those big rocks, represent the things that are the most important to us. So I've got a question for you. What do you think are the most important things in your life, right? What do you think are the most important things in your life? We need to personally know, and I think even name what those things are if we're going to make them the big rocks and we're going to get them in the jar first. We've all had a similar experience. We go to one restaurant or business and we have a great experience. I mean, the employees, when we say thank you, they say things like, "My pleasure." And, they're there. They have an attitude of service and just to try and make sure you have a great experience, and they seem happy about doing it. But then we go to a different place, a different restaurant, a different store, and it feels like we're just a bother. You know what I mean? Like you begin to place your order and they act like you're interrupting their day by trying to order some food or get their help with something. And the difference really is values. And I'm going to tell you, every organization, every person has values. Whether or not we define them is the difference between them getting done or getting acted out or lived out and them just being something that's a placeholder on a wall and look like artwork. These values affect everyone that steps foot in that business. They affect everyone that steps foot in our church. The servants here, or the employees at a business, and the customers, or the people that come and see us every week. It affects the entire group of people. Over the next few weeks, that's what we're going to be talking about, is our values. When I started here as the pastor in 2019, I knew that God wanted us to be the kind of church that has a huge impact in our community, and to lean into the things that make W3CU such a great church to be part of. I'm going to tell you, I've been in a lot of churches over the years, and W3CU is by far the best church I've ever had the privilege of being a part of. And you know what makes it great? It's you. It's the people that are part of this church. And my intention over the next few weeks is to remind you of the things that make this such a special church to be part of. Our mission is always to, and you can say it with me, to love God and to love people, right? To love God and to love people. We want to be a church that helps people know God, find freedom, discover purpose, and make a difference. And that's the kind of church that we want to be. You see, our values determine how we will actually do that. Every one of our values is rooted in the idea that everything we do is an act of worship toward God, that we give our lives in worshiping Him. The things that we value spell out the concrete ways we will accomplish our mission and live the vision. Last week I shared that the word for the year is rest. And I know you didn't get to see that, but that's what that's about. And by rest, I don't mean going to sleep and taking a nap. What I do mean is doing the things that God has called us to do and then trusting Him for the results. And if we practice the values, if we have faith in these things that are rooted in God's Word, then I really do believe we will see God do great things. I am confident that God will bless you, God will bless our community, God will bless your family. But listen, these aren't things that we can just administrate from an office. These are things that real people have to live out. You have to make them a priority in your life. They have to be the big rocks. In John 3:16, we're told God so loved the world. You know who the world is? It's not about geography, it's people, right? When John says this, he's talking about people. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, right? He did that for people because He loves people. And way back in the book of Genesis, God says we are created. He made men and women in His image, right? All that tells us one thing. People matter to God. People matter to God, and so people should matter to us. I can remember sitting around the table with our leaders in January of 2019 and discussing the things that really do make W3CU a great place to be part of, a great church to be part of. And they, to a person around the table, people said, it is the people that make this church up, that make it so great. And we say it like this: everyone matters. Everyone that ever walks through our doors matters. And we say, we're all a little bit broken, but we are a people who love everyone. We're a people who love everyone. There's an old Irish poem, I love it. The old Irish poem, it goes like this: to live above with the saints we love, that would be a glory. But to live below with those we know, well, that's another story. Has there ever been a truer poem? Has there ever been a truer sentiment? The whole idea of loving people sounds great until you meet some people, right? Until you actually meet some people. I mean, they're the kind of people you ask their significant other, you say, did you wake up grumpy this morning? Or did you let them sleep, right? Or did you let them sleep? These are the people that haven't always been so kind. In fact, maybe they're rarely kind. And they've complained, and maybe they've even attacked us and been pretty nasty at some times in the past. Sometimes They're people that are messing up their lives by the decisions that they're making and the choices that they're making. Loving people is good, but the truth is sometimes you and me, we all struggle to love people, to love real, living, breathing people, not idealistic, pie-in-the-sky people. All of us want to love people well, but when we meet a few, that's when we begin to throw our hands up and say, I'm ready to give up on this idea of loving people because this person is too mean or stinky or lazy or selfish or self-righteous or sinful or, just fill in the blank with whatever the fault might be. We especially don't want to love people that aren't friendly or that aren't receptive to our loving acts toward them or remain unchanged. And probably if I asked you, you could tell me who some of those people are. You could tell me about interactions that you've had with that person. Maybe you could also tell me about wonderful people too. People who did their very best to extend love and kindness to you, that went out of their way for you. And for most of us, I think we've had both experiences, sometimes maybe even with the same person. You know why that is? It's because people are people. It's because people are just people, and they're messed up, and they mess up just like me and just like you. They get their feelings hurt, and they respond badly. And instead of maybe coming to you and talking to you about it, maybe they go and they tell somebody else about it. Or they refuse to forgive and move on and move past the hurt. Maybe today the person that needs to forgive is you. Maybe you're the person that needs to move past the hurt. Well, the text I'm going to share with you today is out of John chapter 13. And I want to set it up and give you a little bit of context. Jesus had just washed all the feet of the disciples, right? He's getting ready to suffer the most horrendous death that humans ever dreamed up. And he's getting ready to suffer, might I add, for a group of people who are going to all abandon him when the chips are down. And even one of these people is the very person that set the things in motion that would cause Jesus to be crucified. Jesus has just washed the feet of all of these disciples. And, that's significant because in ancient Palestinian culture, first century Palestinian culture, the job of washing feet was the job reserved for the lowest ranking servant in a household. People's feet were nasty. They wore these sandals, if they had any shoes at all, and they walked through streets that didn't have a sewer system. It was kind of an open sewer. So you can imagine what their feet were like. And Jesus washes their feet, and then he says some words that are very shocking. John 13, 34 and 35, he says this, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." And now my use of the word shocking, I know sometimes, we blow things up and make them into something bigger. But I'm going to tell you, this is a pretty big statement that Jesus says. To say it's shocking is not a stretch. He said, "A new command I give you." Now, if you go all the way back in the Bible to the book of Exodus, Moses comes down off the mountain and God gave him 10 commandments for the people. The Jews take these 10 commandments, they look at them, and they begin to define them with 613 specific do's and don'ts. And then comes Jesus, and he takes the 613 commands and he reduces them all the way down to 2: to love God and to love people. But here Jesus further reduces the law to one thing: to love one another. And Jesus doesn't say, "God told me to say this." No. Jesus says, "A new command I give to you," or "a new commandment I give to you." And at this point, I think we have to wonder, how does Jesus reduce the whole law, all 613 to this, down to love one another? Well, let me try to explain how this actually elevates the law higher even than the Big Ten, bigger than the 10 Commandments. Now, most of us have probably been in an environment at one point or another in our lives when there were a lot of rules. We've probably been somewhere, maybe it was a place you worked, maybe it's when you went to school. There were a lot of rules. And you know, most of us do pretty good at keeping the rules, right? We can keep them. In fact, most of the time we can even keep rules or laws that we maybe think are kind of stupid, really, right? I mean, we can even keep them, because we don't want to get in trouble with the authorities, right? We just want to get by, right? We just want to do what we got to do. But let's think about what it means when we love someone. Look, when I love someone, I don't need a lot of laws. I don't need a lot of laws. Becky and I don't often discuss the fact that our relationship is mutually exclusive. We don't ever, in fact, I can't remember us ever having a conversation where Becky said to me, hey, I really wish you'd break up with your girlfriend, right? That's never happened. See, can you imagine what that'd be like? Can you imagine you come into my house and on my refrigerator is one of those little whiteboards and the house rules are written on it. It says, house rules, number 1, don't cheat on each other. Right? Can you imagine what that would be like? We don't need a rule spelled out for us because the exclusivity of our relationship is spelled out by our mutual love for one another. There are no rules when it comes to Becky that I think are stupid. I love her and I want to do everything I can to make her feel loved. We don't need a list of rules around our marriage because love is the rule. You see, if something is not loving and it's not good for the other person, don't do it, right? It doesn't matter what the Bible says about not doing something. It doesn't matter if it's silent on the matter or not. Don't do it if it's not loving, right? If it's not a loving thing to do. Jesus is raising the standard of our behavior beyond rule keeping to loving, right? To loving. It's not that there is no law. Don't turn this off and say, well, he's saying the 10 Commandments don't matter. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is the law is now that I act lovingly toward others. The law is now that I act out of love for the good of other people. And if I love you, I don't do anything to hurt you. I don't do anything to hurt you. And in fact, I might even do positive things, maybe even to my own detriment, to love you. Love is the fulfillment of the law. And that's what Jesus is saying. But Jesus is, I told you, he said, a new command I give. He is declaring his deity here. Commandments come from God. And here Jesus is commanding us to value people, to love people. Considering everything I know about people, why would Jesus command us to love one another? There's a great book written by a guy named Gary Chapman. If you haven't read it, you should. And it's called The 5 Love Languages. In that book, he identifies 5 ways that we both give and receive love. And usually we have a preference for one or more of them. And the five ways are: 1, words of affirmation; 2, quality time; 3, acts of service; 4, physical touch; and 5, gifts. Now, we can certainly use our words to express love for God through prayer, through singing, through worship, whatever it might be. And, we can even spend quality time with God. We can spend time with Him when we get before Him in prayer and we're just quiet and spending time with Him. As we read devotions, as we spend time in His Word, we can spend quality time with God. But how do you perform an act of service for God without serving another person? And how do you give a gift to God without giving a gift to another person, without blessing another human being? How do you physically touch God without touching people? The truth is, you can't, right? You can't. But when we serve, when we touch, when we give gifts to other people, we are doing it to God. And if you read through the Gospels, Jesus says this. He says, hey, if you gave a cup of cold water in my name, you did it to me, right? The same as you did to these, you did it to me. Jesus breaks everything down to this one command because loving people and loving God are completely intertwined. They are completely intertwined in every way. And you can't love God and not love people. So the question then becomes, how in the world am I supposed to love some of the knuckleheads God has put in my life, right? And you know, not all of them are mean and nasty, but then again, you know, we don't struggle to love the people that are sweet, right? It's the hard cases that we struggle to love. The people who have hurt us. It's also maybe people that aren't like us. They listen to different music than we listen to. They make different choices than we make. Sometimes choices that are way outside of what God's Word says. It helps to realize that things aren't always as black and white for other people as they are in the worlds of others. You see, every person we meet has been the victim of sin, either their own or someone else's, and in most cases, a little bit of both. It helps to realize some principles about real people. Here's the principle. The principle is this: hurting people hurt people and are hurt by people. Get that? Hurting people hurt people and are hurt by people. Most people are doing the best they can on their own. 90% of the people you meet, they're doing the best they can on their own. And it's only a matter of time until you run into someone who is hurting in life. The problem is, when most of us bump up against those people, we think in a very self-centered way. And we think, well, they did this to me. Well, let me explain something to you. The truth is, this person is hurting. And maybe we brushed them in a spot where the pain is. Maybe we said something or did something that reminded them of a past hurt, and they responded poorly to that. You see, what they do or say to you, it's not personal, and don't take it personally. Realize that this is a person that Jesus died for. They're a person, Jesus, and they matter to Him. And sometimes they may even be someone who is trying to follow Christ, but they're going through life without experiencing all the healing that Jesus has for them. These are people that God loves and that He has called you and I to love. Here's another principle. Loving people means that we lift people, right? Loving people means we lift people. If you and I are going to practice loving people, we've got to realize that love is more about actions than it is about feelings. We've got to get past the idea that we have to feel something to value and serve and love other people. In a letter Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, you're very familiar with this, you've heard it a million times before, probably at a wedding. Paul says this, it's in 1 Corinthians 13 and verses 4 through 8. He says, "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails." And you cried a little bit when you heard it read, and you thought, oh, this is so sweet, this is such a precious thing. And then you moved on. But I want you to notice something. Paul never once in this says, love is a wonderful feeling about how much time you want to be around some other person. He never says that. He never says anything about emotions. Paul is giving a list of attitudes and behaviors in this passage. And Jesus says His words about loving one another right after He had washed the feet of the disciples. Did you hear that? He did something. If everyone matters to God, then love is an action. It's not a feeling. It's a choice. And it is an action that we intentionally do things to raise the status of other people. I want you to think about what Jesus did. Jesus, God in the flesh, did the thing the lowest ranking servant does to this group of disciples. And here this group was. Think about who these guys were. I mean, Peter was foul-mouthed and impulsive. John and his brother James struggled with anger. Andrew struggled with significance. Matthew was a crook. Philip was a social butterfly. Bartholomew or Nathaniel was a cynic. Thomas was a skeptic.
James the less may have been a total wallflower, because you don't hear much about him. Simon was a zealot and maybe a murderer or a bandit, right? That's what that means, that word zealot. Thaddeus, we don't know much about. He may have been another wallflower. And again, these guys bailed on Jesus in his most crucial moment. I bet Jesus knew it was coming, but still, he had no hesitation in serving these guys and in washing their feet. And if we're going to love people, we've got to act in a way that raises their status. We need to do things that make them feel loved, things that demonstrate the love of Christ. And when you raise people's status, I'm going to tell you, they feel loved. Here's a principle. People do not exist to serve us. We exist to serve them. And I'm going to tell you, if you live your life that way, it will change everything. People do not exist to serve us. We exist to serve them. I don't know who to credit with this next quote, but I've heard it a lot of times, and it goes something like this. People are an investment that always pays rich dividends. When we love people, we invest in them. Resting in God often requires us to do what God says and then trust Him for the right outcome, to trust Him for the outcome that most honors Him. In Hebrews chapter 11, which is sometimes called the Hall of Faith, right? God talks about people like Abraham and Moses and the impact that they had. But I love the end. Hebrews 11, 39 and 40. The author says this. He says, "These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect." Jesus knew as He washed the disciples' feet that day that the 3 years He'd spent investing in the disciples were not going to pay off immediately, but were part of a long-term strategy that would eventually bless the whole world. We don't often think about life in terms of our long-term impact, investing in valuing in people. I read a neat story not too long ago. It's about Oxford. And New College in Oxford was founded in 1379. It's one of the oldest colleges in the school. And when they actually built it, they built a large dining hall, as they often did, and it had these big oak beams in the roof of it, in the ceiling. They were exposed, and they were 2 feet square, and they were 45 feet long. That's a massive oak beam. Well, one day, a busy entomologist is up there in the ceiling, and he begins to poke at these beams with a penknife, and he notices that they are infested with beetles. Well, he goes and he tells the college council. Obviously, the council is distraught about this, and they're wondering, like, where are we going to find oak beams to replace the ones that we had in the ceiling? There just are not many oak trees that are like that anymore. That is hard to come by. One of the junior fellows that was there on the council said, well, why don't we talk to the college forester? Because he oversaw all the lands that had been endowed to the college, and there were lands all across the country. So they decided that was a good idea and called in the college forester. He comes in. He'd not been anywhere near the college pretty much for the whole time he'd been the forester. And they asked him if there were any oaks that would be suitable for that. He says, we'd been wondering, sirs, when you'd be asking. And they said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? And what they found out is that a grove of oaks had been planted to replace the beams in the dining hall, because they always knew that oak beams became infested with beetles. And this plan had been passed down from one forester to the next for over 500 years. And they would say, don't touch them oaks. Them are for the new college at Oxford to replace the beams when they get infested with beetles. Someone had the vision and the foresight hundreds of years before to plant that grove of trees. You see, your impact with people and the investments that you make in them are long-term. Choosing to actively love someone can affect generations, releasing them from curses. And what is a generational curse? Well, that is a pattern of destructive sin that may play itself out over several generations in a family. Valuing and investing in people ensures a future that is God-honoring. And Jesus could see that future as he made this investment with his disciples. So what are some concrete ways that we love people? Well, number one is this. Think the best about people. Right? Always believe the best about people. Even if they seem unkind, realize that they're meeting the world mostly based on their past experiences, and they can't see a better future. You believe the best about people always. Here's the second thing you can do. Always look for ways to express care for people. Always look for ways to express care. Everybody you meet is going to ask 3 questions about you, right? Do they care about me? Can I trust them? And can they help me, right? Do they care about me? Can they help me? And can I trust him? Trust this person. Not only does your investment in their life benefit them, but it also benefits you. It is impossible to have too many friends, and there is no joy greater than helping someone else come to know Jesus through some small investment you made in their life. It is living a fulfilled life. 3 parting shots I want you to know today. 3 things. Number 1, you matter to God. Jesus came because he loves you, flaws and all. That's it. Full stop. You are loved by God. You matter to him. Here's the second thing. We love you. This church, you matter to us. You are loved. No matter how unlovable you might feel, you are loved. This is a people. We will love you here at this church no matter what. We'll love you. And number 3, and this is for those of you, this is really for the church. Listen. Let's love others like God loves them. Decide today that you will look beyond what you see on the surface of people's lives and their behaviors and realize that people may be hurting and that you and I can be agents of healing for them. Let's raise the status of people above our own status, right? Let's lift them above ourselves. Let's be a people whose mouths are filled with kind words and whose hands are ready to bless others. Let me pray for you. Jesus, as we come before you, I lift up to you those that are here and hearing this message, Lord, wherever they're at today. And God, I pray that they would know this truth, Lord, that they are loved by you. God, I pray that you would begin a work in their heart, Lord, and draw them toward yourself. Just a couple more things. Look, you may have never had anyone tell you how much you matter to God, but I want you to know that Jesus said you matter this much. And then he stretched out his hands and he took the nails that would set you free. You matter to him. God made you as someone special, and he made you as someone he wants a real relationship with. And listen, that's not just about watching church online or attending church. It's a real relationship. And like every relationship in your life, it begins with a conversation. And you can ask him into your life right now, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, just by praying a simple prayer. It goes something like this. Jesus, I accept what you did for me on the cross of Calvary. If you're at home and you want to pray this prayer, you can pray it with me. I accept that you are who you say you are, and I accept the gift that you came to bring. Lord, I believe that what you did paid for all of my sin, God, and sets me free from the curse of sin. And Jesus, right now, I'm confessing you as Lord of my life. Would you come and live in me and live through me? If you prayed that prayer today, make sure you reach out. You can reach out to our church on our website and let us know that you prayed at w3cu.com. God bless you, and we'll see you soon.